Sales comp is actually the operating system for go-to-market.
Brian Lee has built that operating system at some of the biggest names in tech, Salesforce, Carta, and now Notion, where he has scaled comp from around 80 commissionable employees to over 400 in 2.5 years.
As a team of one, it's been quite a roller coaster.
Brian Lee, global sales compensation partner at Notion, reading a confession from The Compensator, an Everstage publication. I quit because of the comp plan. I told HR it was an opportunity for growth, but everyone in the room knew.
When you get sales comp wrong, it's going to bleed down. And what that means for any organization is that you have lost capacity. To me, trust is really the currency of sales comp.
Brian breaks down how to build a plan from scratch, the earliest signs yours is breaking, how to scale one, the role of sales comp in go-to-market, along with much more.
I've seen AEs make upwards of $1 million in a quarter easily.
Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. Brian, welcome to GTMnow.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It is so great to have you here. I'm really excited to dive in. We recently actually published an interview around sales compensation, but it was from a bit of a different lens.
Yeah.
It was kind of an overarching lens. It was Siva Rajamani, the CEO of Everstage, and he's got this purview of many, many, many different companies and their comp structures. And we got so many questions about comp and demand for more on comp. So we're going to go even deeper. And from the expert practitioner view that you have, having built it at Notion, at Carta, Salesforce. So why don't we start there with, give us just a tiny bit of background on your work in the sales compensation space.
Yeah, I'd say I really started my career in sales comp at Salesforce. And from there, you start to see the downsizing of the organizations that I start to join. And it's because it allowed me to get a broader breadth of impact to the organizations after building out sales compensation for a massive tech company like Salesforce. So kind of understanding comp philosophy to its core so well that you are then able to wear the different hats within revenue operations and revenue strategy. And then how does that actually drive behavior, right? Because for me, I think a lot of people tend to view sales comp as a derivative of HR, but in reality, sales comp is actually the operating system for go-to-market, right? And so it really is a impactful lever for us to double down on, right? And really understand not just the plan mechanics, but actually what drives meaningful behavior for all of our reps and sellers.
Absolutely. Makes me think of the classic Charlie Munger quote of, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome, because it truly is that. If we're relying on sales to actually close revenue, then the incentive is what is going to dictate that outcome, which is revenue, and what every company is striving to obtain, of course, retention also.
Yeah, of course. And, I think about sales comp, where sales comp is often something that folks tend to forget about, or it's the last thing that they build or think about, but it's also the first thing that also gets blamed, right? When, why is my comp wrong? Or, maybe it's a downstream impact from a lot of the upstream decisions. And so for me, I've been really trying to change that narrative a bit of bringing sales comp to the forefront of the decision-making process, because once you understand what the overall strategic objective of a company is, or what behavior we then want to drive, then I can be effective at my job.
Definitely, that overarching goal. So you sit at both the strategic and the operational side, really kind of owning it end to end.
Yeah, and because I kind of built it from beginning to end, right? Like being someone who is actually going through that close cycle every month, every quarter, being the ones to actually set up and send comp plans on a regular cadence, triaging a lot of the inquiries, building out the system, you then have an appreciation for this function, but then having a seat at the table to also drive and bring insights to leadership on what needs to change to then better align with what the company is trying to achieve, right? So it's been rewarding getting to not just do the tactical and operational pieces, but then having a imprint on the strategy and what we're kind of racing towards.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And I mean, you started it from the ground up at Notion. You've scaled it tremendously across Notion, across Carta, across Salesforce. How many comp structures do you think you've built, or how many sales reps do you think you've kind of created the comp structures for?
It's kind of I actually don't know what that number is,
Yeah.
but I will say that, when I was at Salesforce, we probably grew this company from 40,000 employees to by the time that I left, I think it was around 80,000. So kind of doubled in size. And so, there are so many sellers on different frequency of plans. And so to even think about what the number of touch
Yeah.
is quite it's quite jarring,
Yeah.
but you know at Notion, we were able to scale to roughly over 400 now. And when I started, we were around 80 to 90 total commissionable employees. So in the span of, let's say, like 2.5 years, growing that much has been rewarding, but also as a team of one, it's been quite a roller coaster.
I bet. So take us through the roller coaster from the beginning at Notion, like creating the sales compensation structure from the ground up.
Yeah, I'd say I think of it in three different kind of phases of really learning how to crawl, then learning how to walk, and then now we're kind of in this phase of like, okay, are we able to run, right? And so the first phase and kind of my P0 when I started at Notion was not necessarily to change the way that comp actually existed. It was building the foundation of sales comp. And so what that means is actually trying to just stop the bleeding from happening, right? It was trying to take a step back and build trust with the organization, right? So before I started, sales comp was just done manually. It was done in spreadsheets. It was done with different data sources that you kind of compile together to build this model. But knowing the growth trajectory that we were on, it was just not feasible for us to just continue this way, right? And continue to maybe just focus on the comp design change right away. It was actually how do we take a step back and build the foundation? And what that meant was automating and scaling incentives, right? So we started to go through a full RFP process because I've kind of worked with a lot of the ICM solutions at both Carta and Salesforce. It was a opportunity for me to understand what solution was out there and what solution best fit the needs of Notion. And that's when we decided to go with Everstage and really build the foundation of automating sales commissions, providing visibility to our sales reps, and then taking that data and providing data-driven insights to leadership to then allow us to know how and where to move and when to move. And so it's been really rewarding to kind of see that trajectory and that growth at the organization. And so we did that within year one. And year two was really about, okay, how do we operationally scale? How do we actually get all of the moving pieces to kind of move in a way that kind of makes this flywheel work? And so it was focusing on reporting and analytics, right? Because your data is going to inform how you should then play this next chess move, where the priorities should really lie, and building out the muscle of creating a repeatable system, right? That you can rinse and repeat because as a team of one, it was hard to do the tactical things while also focusing on the strategic priorities at the same time. So I needed to make sure that the team was aware of like, okay, this is the cadence that we need to operate on. This is the expectation that we expect from managers, from sellers, and from leadership. And once you have that buy-in, we were able to then focus on like phase three, which is, okay, how do we then tweak and fine tune our comp design that allows us to better achieve what we're looking for and achieve a more cohesive go-to-market team. And so Notion, I'd say, has been around for quite some time, but our go-to-market engine has really only been around for, I'd say, 2 to 3 years, right? So it's quite young in its maturity curve, and it's also been a great like blank canvas for me to really steer us in the right direction.
Hmm. Well, fascinating to build with that blank canvas. And I think it's incredible the scale that Notion has had up to that point. Like you mentioned, you came in and there were 80 to 90 sellers
Yeah.
already in place before you even had, the sales compensation automated and these kind of technologies that you mentioned, like Everstage in place before then. So that's just incredible
Yeah.
scale that Notion's been able to get to. It's a testament to the product
Yeah,
also.
totally. And, I knew that, there's when everything feels like it's on fire and there's so many moving pieces where, everything is this nice shiny thing that you can fix, it can often create a lot of like distraction, right?
Right.
And what I've done with leadership was actually telling them, "Hey, we know these things are on fire, right? But in order for us to be successful, we need to acknowledge that these things aren't going to be perfect. We need to kind of have it on the back burner, but what is the key 1 to 3 things that we're going to prioritize and fix now that will allow us to be successful long term, right? It's like not just zooming in on this one thing that needs to be fixed, but it's understanding how do you actually sequence some of these fundamental changes so it actually makes sense and you can bring the entire go-to-market team along that journey, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of it is making sure that we move in tandem and we move in lockstep and knowing when to make that move versus trying to do everything all at once and not doing everything well.
Yeah, completely makes sense. That's the strategy side too that you mentioned.
Totally.
It almost makes me think of like HubSpot because they talk about their three-tiered version and it's, between 2007 and 2013, I want to say, but they had essentially their revenue goals, their go-to-market goals baked in as the sales lever goals, to your point of it is the go-to-market kind of lever that you can pull on. So
Yeah.
the first one was land customers, obviously, get
Yeah.
customers. The second one was fixed churn. And the third one was sustainable growth.
Yeah.
And it really ties into those goals. So you mentioned right now you're pulling on certain levers based on your goals. Like, what are your goals, if you don't mind me asking, at Notion right now that you're optimizing for?
Yeah. So currently, our big focus is around shifting from our traditional SaaS seat-based, license-based model to unlocking this new aha moment on how do we actually sell efficiency, right? How do we actually sell work, right? And you see a lot of customers and other players in that space moving to usage-based pricing, right? To this consumption model because we're in the era of efficiencies and we're in the era of how do we unlock more with not just prompts, but actual work. Having someone who could actually, you know, synthesize all of your emails and actually respond to them, right? And take action on the user's behalf. And so we're starting to shift to selling seats to selling work or efficiency has been a big priority for us at Notion this past couple of months.
Totally, totally makes sense. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
And, Notion scaled PLG for
Yes.
a very long time. But you previously have sales-led organization experience also with Salesforce and Carta. So I'm curious, like, how does sales commission strategy change based on the motion, if at all?
Yeah. I'd say, at Salesforce, you didn't really have a PLG motion, nor did you really have that at Carta. So for me, working at a company like Notion where it was PLG I'd say it's a double-edged sword, in that you start to have to shift behavior in a different way, and so I'd say what I've gained from Salesforce was understanding the critical moments or the critical inputs into sales compensation. At Salesforce, I worked on a lot of the M&A activities. So working through the MuleSoft acquisition, working through the Tableau and Slack acquisition. Slack was the last acquisition that I worked on
That's a
before
big
kind of
one.
transition over to my time at Carta. And it was understanding not just Salesforce's comp design and comp philosophy really well. It was understanding it where we could then build out an M&A playbook for bringing over all of these acquisitions into the Salesforce ecosystem, right? How do we phase out certain cohorts of roles? How do we move them over to comparable roles and what that pay mix could look like, what the components could look like at these acquisition companies, and bringing them into that Salesforce ecosystem in a way that makes sense and that was spread over a duration of time, right? Because you can't fix everything all at
Yeah.
once and just expect it to work, right? Like you need to be very thoughtful about what you do when you do it, and I'd say building trust is really important to me, and in terms of uh, how I think about success of my stakeholders, right? Because to me, trust is really the currency of sales comp. Once you're able to earn that trust, you then have a platform for you to then move more mountains and build that credibility up front with your stakeholders.
hmm Love that. And for a lot of leaders that want to create that trust also in the organizations that they're building with their salespeople, what are the components, I guess, if we were to deconstruct it, of a sales comp plan
Yeah.
that helps enable that trust too?
Yeah. I'd say sales comp is really, if you kind of remove it to its core, right, is I think of it in like three simple buckets. One is your OTE and pay mix, right? Of, okay, is the pay competitive enough to market, right? And then the next part is, well, what is the pay mix, right? Oftentimes people think pay mix is just a easy split that adds up to 100, but it's actually a signal to the sellers of what they have influence over, right? And so I think having a well-defined and well thought out pay mix by different roles and cohorts actually signals to the sellers that, okay, this is what the business wants me to focus on, or this is what I have influence and control over in terms of like the go-to-market engine and life cycle. And the second part is around all of your quotas and pay curves, right? Like you can't have one without the other. And so you then start to look at, what is the tops down and bottoms up? You can't necessarily just decide on what a quota is, right? And oftentimes people um, try to reverse into this number when they have a certain plan target that they need to meet. So, the easy way is to kind of just reverse engineer. If I have this many sellers, right? How do I then kind of divvy up the pie to actually get to these quotas? But sometimes you also need to do some back testing, right? Of what actually what is the conversion rates between some of our pipeline? What is our pipeline, right? Like, at Notion, we have a PLG motion,
Yeah.
which is great because it allowed us to kind of bring some of the self-serve customers over into the sales assisted business. And it worked well for us, right? But then is that cohort going to dry up? And do we then need to think about pivoting strategies? That's something that we've kind of been working through, and something that is very particular on the PLG to like sales led motion transition. That is something that's kind of been top of mind for us, and building more of a cohesive journey for our customers, right? Because it was initially just like two very separate business units that now we're trying to unify and to make sure that we put the customers first in that entire experience. So I'd say that is the second piece around comp. And then the third piece is really around the governance, right? The governance of your policies, your terms, what you're actually crediting on, and making sure that all three pillars are um, are working in tandem with each other, right? When one doesn't speak to the other, that's when you start to see the degradation of comp plans. That's when you start to see a lot of thrash and confusion from the sellers. And it just doesn't, something has to be fixed within those three pillars to actually make it work. So I'd say when you distill comp down, it's really these three fundamental like inputs to a comp design.
You've got these three components, the three inputs, and like you mentioned, if they're not working together, there's some degradation.
Yeah.
So, what would be the earliest signs of degradation that founders and leaders should be conscious of and aware of?
Yeah. I'd say the first thing that I tend to look at is actually the quota attainment pacing, right? So looking at, if you're on a quarterly plan, right? Are deals really being bunched at the end of the quarter, or how do we actually spread out the booking of attainment across the quarter, right? And that usually signals, okay, maybe the sales cycle is a lot longer, and so you see these deals kind of closing later, or taking longer to actually to actually close. So understanding how your deal cycle typically lasts, or what that deal cycle looks like, is really important before it even gets to the sales comp payout, right? Like you should really be looking at how the team is actually pacing throughout that period, whether it be monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual, looking at certain metrics to actually see how the reps are performing before you actually run your commission cycle. That gives you just more wiggle room to then adjust as needed, right? Like, is it purely just on some seasonality that you need to address? Do you need to potentially build a spiff to address some of the performance lag? And then I'd say on the actual commission payout and attainment, is looking at overall attainment distribution, right? So are you having more of a right skewed attainment distribution, that most people are just blowing out their quotas, right? And that signals, okay, I need to then either adjust what my quota is, or understand what the root cause of, what your attainment distribution is telling you. I'd say everyone in the industry is going to want to chase after, what is a fairly evenly distributed bell curve. And so you start to then align that with, okay, I need to adjust quotas a little bit here, or do you adjust it at the region level, or if it's at the segment level? Sometimes there's different levers that you can pull to actually understand where you need to make these adjustments, right? And so for me, it's not just, okay, let's just make a blanket shift towards increasing quotas, but it's actually understanding some of the inputs to how we actually got here, right? So understanding with sales managers what some of the root cause is, and then from there you can make the right changes accordingly. And then on the last piece, even after you pay out, right? It's looking at what your plan governance is, and looking at if you have the right policies and terms in place to actually protect the company from a lot of the exposed risk when it comes to massive payouts, right? And so we started to, when I built out kind of sales comp at Notion, it was not just focusing on like the plan design, but focusing on a lot of the documentation around all of the different permutations that can happen when
Right.
there is a quota adjustment that's needed, or when someone goes out on a leave of absence, or how do we think about holdovers, right? All of these things kind of have to work synchronously to ensure that you understand the end-to-end mechanics of your comp plan. So I'd say those are kind of the three things that I look out for in terms of making sure that your plan is working as intended, or if it requires you to have a change mid-year, or depending on what your planning cycles look like.
And from planning cycle perspective, can you be a little bit more fluid, or would you recommend, for example, maximum quarterly or maximum every H1, H2, making those shifts?
Yeah, I you won't like the answer, but I'd say it depends,
Yeah.
right? It, it
Yeah.
it really depends on the organization and where you are in terms of that maturity curve. For Notion, we try to keep things as fluid as possible, giving us the flexibility to adjust on a quarterly cadence, because just how fast the industry moves, and giving us that flexibility to adjust as needed. So I'd say most organizations will try to front load all of the planning at the beginning of the fiscal year, with some buffer and room to adjust as needed during the half. And I'd say that's kind of the standard. But then you also have, minor adjustments here and there if needed on a quarterly basis.
Makes sense. And it's such an interesting time because, we used to think, at least from the venture perspective, that if you go back a decade, even before that, pricing was something that you could, if you will, afford to get wrong
Yeah.
when you're building. And now it really isn't. It's like a pivotal part of your go-to-market. And then at the same time, products have never been moving so quickly. And so where product used to be, the sticking point, now go-to-market is. And so I can imagine how tricky that would be as product launches are developing and everything is adjusting, distribution is changing, to
Yeah.
suddenly have to adjust on the comp side is just, it's a lot. It's a
It's a
lot right
lot.
now.
It is. And that's why we kind of built the planning cycle to allow for that flexibility, because you don't know when you need to like pivot,
Yeah.
right? And companies who don't pivot can theoretically just not be successful, right? And so you see a lot of folks trying to figure out this cadence of how much do I change, how frequently do I change, and is it, you know, going to move the needle on what we're trying to achieve. But to your point, it's a bit of a roller coaster for a lot of organizations today.
Yeah, well, it's coming full circle. You did mention it was a roller coaster
Yeah,
out the gate, so here we are on it.
yeah, it is.
It's gonna be a good one, a fun one.
A quick pause. Most teams are either paying for tools they've outgrown or making decisions with no real data behind them. Ahrefs is fixing that for free. Ahrefs Free gives you permanent access to 6 of their core marketing tools. You can see which keywords your site ranks for, audit your site for over 170 technical SEO issues, track your web analytics, manage social media from one place, and much more. There is no trial countdown, no credit card required, just a free account that does not expire. This is the kind of toolkit that used to cost thousands a year and is now available to any founder, marketer, or go-to-market team that wants to understand what's actually working on their website. Head to ahrefs.com/free and sign up today. That's ahrefs.com/free.
And, this just came out. It just came out. So I don't know if you've had a chance to see it
No,
yet.
I haven't.
But it's the Compensator.
Wow.
And it's a journal. I'll give you a copy here.
Yeah.
It's a journal and it's hilariously satirical. And when you read through, you're like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious. But then you're like, oh no, this is really relevant and really hits home on the issues that kind of are being faced actually on the sales commission and the RevOps side in entirety. And there's this one kind of page in it.
Yeah.
It's called The Confession Wall. I particularly love this
Oh,
page.
which page is it on?
It's in the insert, page 4. And there is one confession from an AE in vertical SaaS that says, I quit because of the comp plan. I told HR it was an opportunity for growth, but everyone in the room knew. And like we already talked about degradation and what that can cause, like what are the implications of AEs and sales leaders or reps leaving? What does that do for sales compensation? What does that do for your forecasting overall? Obviously, they're usually backfilled, but what does that actually change about the way that you're planning?
Yeah, I mean, it's important, and it just goes to show the importance of sales comp, right? Because like I mentioned, most people tend to think that sales comp is just a easy calculation, right? And that you kind of just set it and forget it, but you don't. You're not successful, right? Because this rep literally said he left because of
Yeah.
the comp plan, right? Because when you're a seller, you're trying to maximize your earnings. And so that's the upside, right? And so when you get that wrong, it trickles down to the entire go-to-market engine, right? And how you need to be more in tune with the behaviors that the comp plan is actually driving, and if it actually aligns to the business. But if you were to put yourself in a rep's shoes, a deal that was maybe promised to me, credited at X, Y, and Z, but when push comes to shove, you actually don't follow through, or it was miscommunicated, right? That's going to be a sore topic, and you don't have the luxury of just like fixing it, right? Like
Right.
it becomes this stain that rubs people the wrong way, right? So for me, it's not just the comp plan design, but also the commitment that you make to reps on minimizing the surprises, right? For me, that is really important because it builds the trust, right? And so when you get sales comp wrong, it's going to bleed down. And what that means for any organization is that you have lost capacity, right? So
Yeah.
you're then having to rehire and have to go through that build again to actually get the right capacity in place. So it's a huge, a huge loss when sales comp is missed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That ramp call out is a good point. You're not at full capacity, even if you are backfilling right away.
Yeah, right. Because it's not just like, okay, you lose out on the capacity, but then you lose out on all of the investments that the company made in this one rep, right? When, it could be easily solved if you enable them, you actually communicate transparently on how someone is going to get paid and follow through on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, building that trust with sellers and managers and the entire kind of go-to-market team is really important to not just build your own credibility, but make sure that the implications to the business is not at risk.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a great call out. And a lot of sales reps, whether they're in an organization or they're assessing the next role, they obviously want to be compensated for their work well. So a lot of reps and folks are looking at companies, and this goes for any role actually. People are assessing companies to understand, is this what I'm going to bet my career on?
Yeah.
Is this company what I'm going to bet my career on? So for any sales reps in particular, when they are assessing an organization, do you have any insight or advice, being kind of on the inside of sales commission,
Yeah.
of how to identify a opportunity that they are going to be compensated quite a bit from, if we think about like financially,
Yeah.
because sales comp structure often changes year to year, quarter to quarter, half to half.
Yeah.
Like, how do people tell from the outside in if it's going to be the right move for them financially?
Yeah. I mean, it's really dwindling down to what that overall OTE is going to look like and how much risk are they betting on the potential upside, right? So that's why you see in the AE world, right? It's mostly 50-50 because the upside is giving you a bit of that advantage. If I'm going to potentially put my overall take home at risk, I want to be fairly compensated for the risk that I'm taking on.
Yeah.
And so my advice to sellers is, you know, what is your actual bet on the company? Because at the end of the day, you're going to have to sell that product and you need to be aligned to the overall company mission and values to then be able to speak with a lot of conviction, right? And so that's kind of my advice to sellers. It's, how do you assess what the potential upside is with the risk that you're taking on? And do you actually believe in the product and the trajectory of where this product could go? I'd say those things are the two most important things.
That's great advice. And we always say, on the VC side, you do so much diligence before you make an investment. The
Yeah.
same should be said for any operator assessing any position. It is same thing, an investment of your time and your career also. So
Yeah.
the same amount of diligence should absolutely go in, including how the product resonates with you personally.
Yeah.
How much have you ever seen an AE make? What's the most you've seen an AE make, or an SDR?
On the AE side, I've seen AEs make upwards of $1 million in a quarter easily.
In a quarter or in a year?
In a quarter.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is kind of mind blown, right?
Yeah.
It then starts to make me question, did I go into the wrong to the wrong role or the wrong job? Uh, and a lot of it is then having to assess what I think at face value, you're like, okay, well, $1 million is a lot of money, right? But what did they actually close? And are they fairly compensated for bringing in that revenue is also the other side of the equation, right? Because it's not, you need both to actually justify whether or not the rep actually deserves that payout or not. So for me, it's like, okay, it's a lot of money, yes. What is the percentage of their overall OTE that they're taking home? Were there guardrails that company had to ensure that the payout is indicative of the impact that the rep had? So I'm sure there's been crazy stories across other organizations that folks have seen. And sometimes it's quite jarring when you start to look at these numbers and then you start to question whether or not you should go into sales.
There's definitely a lot more variable in
Totally.
the sales compensation world. And
Yeah.
year to year can vary considerably. Now, you talked a lot about the ratio on the OTE side. What about for far earlier stage? A huge question mark from founders or early stage leaders is, how much do I compensate my first couple reps?
Yeah.
Do you have any perspective on that earlier stage?
Yeah. I'd say it's an interesting question because sometimes it's a bit of a shot in the dark, right? In terms of a founder just having hired their first AE, you don't necessarily know what the right quota could look like, right? And so for what I've seen is actually different kind of different combinations of setting up this initial comp plan or this comp design for the first AE. One school of thought is to actually just put them on 100% guarantee, right? Ensure that they have that they're made whole, while then using data points to then shift your understanding of what can be closed in a quarter or close in a set period, and then adjusting as needed. The other is actually, providing your best estimate for what quotas could look like for this rep, and then having some downside and upside protection for the company, right? So, do you set a set threshold of what maximum payout could look like, as well as the flip side to that is, you know, are you going to ensure that this rep has some cash flow if we're gonna set these targets that seem very arbitrary, or we don't have enough data to be able to have strong conviction over. And so you kind of see two kind of schools of thought in this. I've kind of done it in both kind of capacities before, and it really depends on the level of risk the company is willing to take on, as well as is it signaling to the reps that it's going to minimize what their payout is, right? Because once you kind of set that threshold, it's hard to come back from.
Yeah.
And so I also think about what is the precedent that we're setting when we signal to the team or to the rep that this is kind of our stance on, the initial comp plan.
Makes sense. That's fantastic. Great advice. And last question for you, Brian. One stat that stood out to me in this report, and this is actually taken from a survey of over 200 sales compensation leaders, but is that 80% of sales comp analysts believe AI will be the most significant change in their work over the next 1 to 2 years. I can imagine, at least that rings true for you, but a big question mark around AI and sales comp that also comes to mind when I read this, a little bit separate, but came
Yeah.
to mind, is how does the role of AI agents play into this? Are we going to need to compensate AI agents? How are you thinking about this future state with AI?
Yeah, I think AI is very top of mind for us at Notion, and I'd say it's changing quite rapidly, and so I don't necessarily think that it will change overnight, but you start to see a lot of focus around um, what is the role of AI and the efficiency of it in the entire go-to-market flywheel. And so, there's AI companies who are solely built on having AI be the SDR and BDR for
Yeah.
for a company, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and so, are you starting to see kind of that role kind of go away? My perspective is that it's starting to slowly shift, but at the end of the day, there's still a human touch and element to it. And while maybe that feels a bit far-fetched, I still think people really want that human connection. And I personally don't want to buy from an AI like SDR, right? Like, how much credibility does that bring to the organization? And so, we still are focused and doubling down on the SDR and BDR role as a critical function of building pipeline. But for me, AI is not necessarily replacing specific roles per se, but it's changing how we spend a lot of that time. And so if you're spending a lot of time maybe trying to do the discovery or do the research on a specific customer, that's maybe an opportunity where AI could bring more efficiency for that rep, right? So I think it's unlocking the additional efficiencies across all go-to-market roles, including myself, right?
Yeah.
Within sales comp, but it's not necessarily fully replacing or removing these roles from the equation yet, right? Like
Yeah.
that landscape could change, 6 months from now or a year from now. It's quite hard to tell. And so I'm still very bullish on the fact that there is the human touch or the human connection that is quite important in building the relationship with customers, and who and how you decide to buy is still grounded in a lot of this interaction, right?
Yeah.
Because it's really important.
Absolutely. I echo the same sentiment. Well, Brian, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the time and for the insight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.